Welcome back, traveler. If you are here again, it means that last night our story ended in peace. The Straw Hats slept in the great hall of Elbaf. The fire burned low. The giants kept watch over their sleeping guests. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, the ships of an ancient enemy grew closer. Tonight, the story continues. Tonight, we return to the island of giants. So close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and let the wind carry you back to Elbaf. The moon had climbed high over the ancient valley. Its pale silver light spilled through the tall wooden windows of the great hall, falling softly across the sleeping crew below. Luffy slept curled beside the dying fire. His straw hat rested over his chest. His breathing was deep and calm. Nami and Robin slept side by side, wrapped in warm furs that the giants had gently placed around them. Chopper had curled himself into a small ball on top of a folded blanket, his pink hat tilted slightly to one side. Sanji had fallen asleep at the long wooden table, his head resting gently on his crossed arms. The wine cup in front of him was still half full. Zoro leaned against a great oak pillar in the corner of the hall. His 3 swords rested at his side, exactly where they always did. His eyes were closed, but somewhere beneath the surface of his rest, the old wolf inside him was still listening. Outside the great hall, the village slept as well. The longhouses were quiet. The forges had cooled. Even the wind, which had sung through the trees all day, had softened to a whisper. Only one figure was still awake. An old giant stood at the edge of the western cliff. He was very tall, even by the standards of his people. His beard was as white as the moon. His armor was older than the oldest trees in the forest. His name was Loki. And he had lived for a very, very long time. He looked out over the dark sea. The waves moved slowly beneath the moonlight. The mist that always guarded Elbaf's coastline shimmered faintly in the silver light. To any ordinary eye, the ocean would have looked calm, empty, peaceful. But Loki could see what others could not. He could see the shadows far out on the horizon, the dark shapes moving slowly through the mist, the banners that no living giant had seen for over 1,000 years. He closed his eyes. He listened to the wind. He listened to the sea. He listened to the ancient song of the earth beneath his feet. And then, very quietly, he whispered a name. Shepherd. The name drifted away on the wind, as if the wind itself had been waiting for it. Shepherd, the name of a man who had been asleep for 1,000 years. The name of a man who was now, at last, awake again. Loki turned slowly and began to walk back toward the village. He did not run. He did not shout. He did not sound any alarm. Because the warriors of Elbaf had prepared for this moment for 1,000 years. They did not need to be woken. They only needed to be ready when the dawn came. Inside the great hall, Jarl Brogi opened his eyes. He had not slept. The old warrior rarely slept anymore. There was too much to remember, too much to feel, too much to prepare for. He rose slowly from his great wooden chair. The fire had died down to soft, glowing embers. The straw hats slept peacefully around him. He looked at them for a long, long moment. At Luffy, so small beside the fire. At Robin, curled with a book still resting in her hand. At Usopp, whose bandana had slipped slightly over his eyes. They looked so young. They looked so much like the crews Jarl Brogi had known in his own youth. Dreamers, adventurers, children of the sea. And he wondered, quietly, if they knew what tomorrow would bring. He walked to the doorway of the great hall. The stars above Elbaf were bright tonight. Countless silver points scattered across the velvet sky. He raised his old hand to the wind. He felt its cold breath against his skin. He felt the direction it was coming from. The wind had turned. It was now blowing from the west. And from the west came the ships. At the docks of Elbaf, the sea began to change. The gentle waves that had lapped against the wooden piers all night began to still. The mist that had shimmered silver in the moonlight began to thicken. Darker now, heavier, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. A young giant named Torvid stood watch at the harbor. He was not yet a full warrior. He was perhaps 60 years old, which for a giant was still quite young. His beard had only just begun to grow. His sword was still new and unblooded. Tonight, he was on watch. And tonight, he saw something that he would never forget. The mist parted slightly. And there, just at the edge of the fog, a shape appeared. The first ship. It was black. Not painted black. Not stained black. But black in a deeper way. As if the wood itself had been born from shadow. Its sails hung heavy and still, despite the fact that the wind was blowing steadily. Its hull cut through the water without making any sound at all. And on its highest mast, a single white banner. The banner bore a symbol that Torvid did not recognize. A crown of light encircled by 5 thorns. But somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he did not know he could reach, he felt that he had seen this symbol before. In a story, a very old story, told by his grandmother when he was very small. Torvid raised the great horn that hung at his side, but he did not blow it. Because from the deck of the black ship, a voice spoke. It was not a loud voice. It did not need to be. It carried across the water as if the water itself was carrying it. Young son of Elbaf, the voice said. Do not blow the horn. Not yet. Your elders know we are here. Your elders have known for many years. We come to talk first, to speak of the old promises, to offer the old peace. Only if you refuse, will there be war. Torvid did not lower the horn, but he did not raise it to his lips either. He simply stood there in the moonlight, staring at the black ship. And after a long moment, he turned and he began to run. Not to sound the alarm, but to fetch his elders. He ran through the sleeping village, his footsteps thundering softly across the wooden bridges and stone paths. He passed the forge, still warm from the day's work. He passed the tall watchtowers, standing silent in the moonlight. He passed the great oak in the center of the village, whose branches had spread wider than a small town. And finally, he reached the doors of the great hall. Jarl Brogi was already standing there. The old giant looked down at Torvid with calm, ancient eyes. "How many?" he asked softly. Torvid caught his breath. "One ship, my lord. Only one. But you can feel the others." Brogi finished for him. Torvid nodded slowly. "Yes, my lord. I can feel them. In the mist. Waiting." Brogi looked out at the moonlit village. He did not seem afraid. He did not seem angry. He seemed patient. As if he had been waiting for this moment for so long, that all the sharp edges of it had been worn smooth by time. "Wake the council," he said gently. "But do not wake our guests. Let them sleep. They will need their rest for what comes." Torvid nodded, and then, more quietly, he asked, "My lord, what does come?" Jarl Broga was silent for a long moment. Then in a voice as soft as falling snow, he said, "Something we have all been dreaming of, young one, for 1,000 years." Torvid ran to wake the council, and Jarl Brogi turned and walked slowly back inside the great hall. He knelt down beside Luffy, who was still sleeping peacefully by the embers of the fire. For a long moment, he simply looked at the boy, at his straw hat, at his calm, dreaming face. And then, gently, so gently, Brogi placed his massive palm on the ground beside Luffy, not touching him, just close, like a father watching over a sleeping child. "Sleep, little king," he whispered. "Sleep while you can. The morning will bring its own weight." The wind moved softly through the great hall. The embers of the fire flickered once, then dimmed. The stars above Elbaf continued their slow dance across the sky. And somewhere far above, on the wooden watchtowers of the village, the giants of Elbaf began to gather. One by one, silent as shadows, ancient as the trees themselves. They came in full armor, with swords strapped to their backs, with shields older than the harbor stones. But they did not gather for war. Not yet. They gathered for the meeting, the talk, the ancient words that had to be spoken before any sword could be drawn. Down at the docks, the black ship had come to rest. It floated silently near the pier. Its dark sails still hung heavy. Its wooden hull did not creak. Even the water beneath it seemed strangely still, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. A ramp lowered slowly from the side of the ship. It touched the wooden planks of the pier without a single sound. And then, a figure appeared at the top of the ramp. He was tall, taller than any human, but smaller than any giant. Somewhere in between, somewhere ancient. He wore a long cloak of pale grey silk. His hood was drawn low over his face. Only his hands were visible, and they were very old, older than they should have been. Around his neck, he wore a chain of gold, and on the chain hung a single medallion, the same symbol as the banner, a crown of light encircled by 5 thorns. He walked slowly down the ramp. Each step was patient, unhurried. When he reached the pier, he stopped, and he waited. He did not have to wait long. From the village path, 3 figures approached. Jarl Brogi walked in the center. To his right, an old warrior named Odin, one of the oldest giants alive. To his left, an ancient shield maiden named Freira, whose braided silver hair fell nearly to the ground. They came in peace. Their weapons were sheathed. Their hands were open. But their eyes carried the weight of 1,000 years. They stopped before the hooded figure. The pier was silent. The mist swelled gently around them. The moon watched from above. Jarl Brogi spoke first. "Shepherd," he said, his deep voice soft as an ocean current. "So it is true. You have finally woken." The hooded figure inclined his head. "After a very long sleep," he replied. His voice was gentle, cultivated, like the voice of an old scholar. "I hoped it would be you who came to greet me, old friend. I hoped I would not have to speak with strangers." Brogi did not smile. "We are not friends, Shepherd," he said quietly. "We have never been friends." "No," the hooded figure agreed softly. "But we were. Once, something." The wind blew gently through the mist. Freira, the old shield maiden, took one slow step forward. "Speak your purpose," she said. "You did not sail for 1,000 years to reminisce. What do you want with our island?" The hooded figure was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he raised his hands. He pulled back his hood. And Freira, for the first time in her life, gasped softly. The face beneath the hood was young. Not old, as his hands had suggested, not weathered by centuries, not lined with the marks of 1,000 years. His skin was pale and smooth. His hair was silver, but not with age. Silver from birth. Silver like moonlight. His eyes were the strangest of all. They were pale gold, like coins that had been polished for centuries, like the eyes of something that was not entirely of this world. He smiled softly at the three giants before him. "What do I want?" he asked gently. "I want what I have always wanted, Freya. Peace. Order. The old world restored." Jarl Brogi's ancient eyes narrowed slightly. "The old world is gone, Shepherd," he said. "You know this. The world does not need to be restored. It needs to be allowed to grow." The silver-haired man tilted his head. "Does it?" he asked softly. "Look at what your world has become. Wars for treasure. Wars for territory. Wars for the amusement of small men in tall thrones. Where is the honor? Where is the meaning? Where is the light of the great sun that once guided all things? The world your ancestors built has forgotten itself. It stumbles like a drunken beast toward its own ending. We come," he said quietly, "to remind it of what it once was." The mist swirled gently around them. The moon watched from above. Odin, the old warrior, spoke for the first time. His voice was deep, rough as an old rock face. "And what do you want from Elbaf, Shepherd? Why come here? Why now?" The silver-haired man looked up at Odin slowly. "Because Elbaf remembers," he said softly. "Your people are the last who still remember the old ways. The honor, the sacred fire, the great sun who watched over all things. We would ask you to stand with us, as you once did, long, long ago." Jarl Brogi laughed softly. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has heard something he has heard many times before. "Stand with you," he repeated slowly. "Against whom, Shepherd?" The silver-haired man smiled. "Against those who would keep the world small," he said quietly. "Against the little kingdoms. Against the world government that pretends to hold everything together. Against the pirates who plunder without meaning. Against all who have forgotten what it means to serve something greater than themselves." Freya spoke again. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the strength of centuries. "And what greater thing," she asked, "do you serve, Shepherd?" The silver-haired man's smile grew slightly. "The truth," he said softly. "The truth that was buried when the great kingdoms fell. The truth that some men have kept alive in their hearts, waiting patiently for the right moment to speak again." He raised his medallion gently. The crown of light, the 5 thorns. The truth that there was once a king before all kings, a god before all gods, a light that gave meaning to every life it touched. "That light is returning," he whispered. "And we come to ask you to stand in that light with us." The 3 old giants were silent for a long time. The mist continued to swell, The water beneath the pier remained perfectly still. The stars above did not blink. And then, very slowly, Jarl Brogi spoke. "Once," he said, his voice soft as the sea. "Once my father told me a story when I was very young. He told me that light is a good thing, that the sun warms our fields, that the fires warm our halls, that candles guide us home when the night is dark. But he also told me to beware of any light that promises to answer all questions. Because such a light is no longer a light. It is a fire, and a fire will burn everything it touches." The silver-haired man was quiet. Then, very softly, he asked, "Is that your answer, Jarl Brogi?" Brogi looked at him for a long, long moment. And then, gently, he shook his head. "No," he said. "My answer is simpler than that. We do not need your peace, shepherd. We do not need your order. We do not need your restored world. We have our fields. We have our fires. We have our children growing tall in the shadow of our trees. That is enough," he said quietly. "That has always been enough." The silver-haired man closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his smile was still gentle, but something had changed in his golden eyes. Something older, sadder, colder. "I had hoped," he said quietly, "that you would understand." He turned. He walked slowly back up the ramp of the black ship. He did not look back. He did not raise his voice. He did not draw any weapon. He simply walked. And when he reached the top of the ramp, he paused, and in a voice as calm as still water, he said, "Then let it be, old friend. Let the world remember what happens when the light is refused." The ramp closed slowly behind him. The black ship began to drift backward, away from the pier, silent as breath, slow as memory. And then, at last, the mist began to move. Not part, not clear. It began to swell. Great pale walls of fog rising from the sea, thicker than any mist Elbaf had ever known. And behind those walls, more shapes began to appear. More ships. 12 of them. Then 20. Then more than any of the giants could easily count. Each of them black. Each of them silent. Each of them bearing the crown of light and the 5 thorns on their pale banners. The fleet of the ancient enemy had arrived. Jarl Brogi turned slowly to Odin and Freyra. His eyes were calm. His voice was steady. "Wake the warriors," he said gently. "Light the sacred fire. Call the young ones to the walls. Send the children to the deep valleys. The old peace is over. The old war has come." Odin nodded once, and he turned, and he ran. Freyra remained beside Brogi for one more moment. And the young pirates, she asked quietly. The ones sleeping in the hall? Jarl Brogi looked out at the moonlit sea. At the 20 black ships, silent and patient in the mist. At the crown of light on the pale banners. At the shape of the dawn, still hours away, but coming. Let them sleep, he said softly. Let them sleep for one more hour, perhaps two. When they wake, they will not be children anymore. Freyra nodded, and she too turned, and she walked back into the village to prepare. And Jarl Brogi stood alone at the pier. Alone beneath the ancient moon. Alone before the ancient enemy. Alone with the weight of 1,000 years pressing gently against his shoulders. He looked out at the black ships. He raised his old hand slowly, and he pressed his palm against his heart. For every giant who fell before us, he whispered. For every child who would not have been born if we had run. For every song still to be sung in these forests. We remember. We stand. We do not yield. The wind moved gently across the harbor. The stars above Elbaf watched in silence. And far away in the great hall, Luffy shifted slightly in his sleep. His straw hat slipped a little to the side. His hand tightened, just for a moment, around the edge of his blanket. As if, somewhere in his dreams, he had felt something. Something distant. Something old. Something calling to him from the edge of the sea. But he did not wake. Not yet. There was still time yet for one more hour of peace. There was still time yet for one more dream. There was still time yet for the last gentle silence before the storm. Inside the great hall, the embers of the fire glowed softly. Robin's book had fallen open beside her. Sanji's cigarette had gone out. Chopper snored gently in his warm little ball. Nami dreamed of home and of a village she had left long ago. Zoro dreamed of a swordsman with white hair waiting for him at the end of a long, long road. Brook dreamed of an old friend whose name he would sing again one day in the long green fields of Elbaf. And Luffy dreamed of the sea. Of a small ship sailing far, far away. Of the sound of laughter carried on the wind. Of a horizon that never seemed to end. In his dream, he was smiling. Outside, the moon began to sink slowly toward the western horizon. The stars grew fainter as the eastern sky began to soften. A pale grey light spread slowly across the mist. The first, softest hint of dawn. The dawn that would bring the war. The giants of Elbaf gathered at the walls. In full armor now, with shields raised, with swords in hand. They did not shout. They did not cheer. They did not sing war songs as some armies did. The giants of Elbaf gathered in silence, because for them, war was not a celebration. It was a solemn thing, a sacred thing, a thing to be done properly and with honor. And so they stood, row after row of them, their pale armor catching the first light of the coming dawn, their braided beards moving softly in the sea wind, their eyes calm and ancient and unafraid. Jarl Brogi walked slowly along the wall, greeting each of them by name. A hand on a shoulder here, a quiet word there, a gentle nod to the youngest warriors whose swords had never yet been drawn in anger. He did not give a speech. He did not need to. They all knew why they were there. Loki, the old giant from the western cliff, was the last to arrive. He walked slowly, leaning on a great wooden staff. His white beard trailed behind him in the wind. His armor was ancient, older than any of the others, and it bore the marks of 1,000 battles. He stopped beside Jarl Brogi. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then gently, Loki said, "You know that I dreamed of this day, Brogi. For most of my life, I did not think I would live to see it." Brogi nodded slowly. "And now that you have?" he asked. Loki was silent for a moment. Then softly he said, "I hope the young ones will forgive us for what we could not prevent, for what we could not carry alone." Brogi placed his massive hand gently on Loki's shoulder. "They will forgive us, old friend," he said. "Because we did not run, because we did not hide, because we chose again and again over the long, slow years to stand." Loki lowered his head slightly, and when he raised it again, the first light of dawn was touching his white beard. Out on the sea, the black ships were still. 20 of them, then 30, then 40, more arriving from the mist with every passing minute. They did not attack, they did not move, they only gathered, slowly, patiently, silently. Like a great pale wolf, watching a village from the tree line, waiting, watching, waiting again. And on the largest ship of all, the silver-haired man stood alone on the deck. His hood was raised again. His hands were clasped gently before him. His golden eyes watched the coast of Elbaf as the first light of dawn began to touch it. Beside him, another figure appeared. A knight in bright silver armor. His helmet was carved with the crown of light. A long white cloak fell from his shoulders. He carried a great sword, taller than any human, taller even than most giants. "They will not surrender, my lord," the knight said quietly. The silver-haired man did not turn. "No," he said softly. "They never do." The knight bowed his head. "Do we begin?" he asked. The silver-haired man was quiet for a long moment. He watched the coast. He watched the wall of giants gathering along it. He watched the pale eastern sky slowly changing color. He thought of Jarl Brogi's words, of the light that promises to answer all questions, of the fire that burns everything it touches. He thought of the sleeping crew in the great hall, the young pirate with the straw hat, the dreamer, the one who reminded him so painfully of another young man he had known once very long ago. He closed his eyes. For just a moment, he almost hesitated. Then he opened his eyes, and the moment was gone. "Yes," he said softly. "We begin at first light." The knight nodded. He turned, and he walked away to prepare the others. The silver-haired man remained alone on the deck. He watched the dawn approaching. He watched the coast of Elbaf. He watched the pale grey light spreading softly across the mist. And very, very quietly, so quietly that even the wind could not carry his words away, he whispered, "Forgive us, Roger. Forgive us for what we must do to your dream." The wind moved gently across the sea. And in the great hall of Elbaf, at last, Luffy opened his eyes. He blinked slowly. The embers of the fire glowed softly beside him. His crew was still asleep around him. The great hall was quiet, peaceful, as if the whole world was just waking gently from a long dream. But something was wrong. Luffy sat up slowly. He looked around the hall. He looked at the fire. He looked at his sleeping friends. And he felt it. A weight in the air. A quiet, pressing feeling. The kind of feeling that comes just before something enormous is about to happen. He rose to his feet. He walked slowly across the great hall, past his sleeping crew, past the dying fire, past the ancient carved doors. He stepped outside. The first pale light of dawn was touching the eastern sky. The village of Elbaf was silent. The long houses were still. No smoke rose from any chimney. No voices called from any street. Luffy walked slowly through the village toward the western wall. He did not run. He did not hurry. He simply walked, following the feeling in the air, following the quiet weight pressing gently against his heart. He reached the wall, and he climbed slowly up the long wooden steps until he stood beside Jarl Brogi and Loki at the highest watchtower of Elbaf. The two old giants looked down at him gently. They did not seem surprised to see him. They did not tell him to go back. They did not shield him from the sight. They simply moved aside slightly, and they let him look. Luffy looked out over the sea. At the 40 black ships gathered in the mist, at the pale banners with the crown of light, at the dawn beginning to break over the water. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, very quietly, he asked, "Are they bad?" Jarl Brogi looked down at him for a long time. And then, gently, he answered, "They believe they are good," he said softly. "That is often more dangerous than believing you are bad." Luffy nodded slowly. He did not seem afraid. He did not seem angry. He simply looked out at the sea, quietly, thoughtfully. Then he lifted his straw hat gently from his head. He held it in both hands. He looked down at it for a moment. And then, softly, he placed it back on his head, and he tightened the cord beneath his chin. "Then I'll help," he said quietly. "Whatever comes." Jarl Brogi looked at him for a very long moment. And then, slowly, gently, he smiled. The kind of smile that a father might give a son on a day the son becomes a man. The kind of smile that only very old warriors know how to give. "I know you will, little king," he whispered. "I know you will." The dawn continued to rise slowly. The pale light spread softly across the mist. The black ships waited, patient and silent. The wall of giants stood ready, calm and unafraid. And in the great hall behind them, the rest of the Straw Hats began, one by one, to stir. Zoro opened his eyes first. His hand was already on his sword. Nami raised her head, her sharp mind already reading the pressure in the air. Robin's book slid softly from her fingers as she rose. Sanji stubbed out his forgotten cigarette. Chopper uncurled slowly, his eyes wide. Usopp sat up and he looked around, and for the first time in his life, he did not feel small. Frankie checked his metal arms. Brook adjusted his top hat. Jinbei rose in slow, calm silence. Together, they walked out of the great hall. Together, they climbed the wooden steps to the highest wall. Together, they stood beside Luffy and Jarl Brogi and Loki as the dawn began, at last, to break. The wind moved softly through the mist. The pale banners of the ancient enemy fluttered gently. The great sun began to rise from the eastern horizon, spreading golden light across the sea. And in that moment, that quiet, sacred, terrible moment, the war for the soul of the world began. But that is a story for another night. Tonight, we leave them there. Standing on the wall in the first light of the dawn, small crew and ancient giants together, waiting for whatever comes. Unafraid, unyielding, unbroken. If you have found peace in tonight's journey, the tale will continue in part 3. The wall will hold, the dawn will rise, the story will find its way home. Sleep well, traveler. The sea will always be waiting.